Hello, lovely people, and welcome to the next episode of my podcast. And I just want to say thank you a million. I mean, absolutely thank you a million, because I woke up this morning and I had 1 million views for the first time on a TikTok. So bless you, TikTokers. However, it was not necessarily favorable. And there were 3,000 comments that we're having a lot of women in arms about orgasms and vibrators. And so I thought I'd come on by myself and talk to you. And I felt that I wasn't qualified. So I've brought on a really dear friend of mine, Suzanne Jane Taylor, who is qualified. But before I introduce Suzanne, I'm going to tell you how we met. 3 years ago, I was single, and I had been for a year, and I was lonely. And I went on Tinder. And I meditated that morning, and I asked my mama to find me somebody really, really beautiful in my life. And sure enough, that always works. And up popped this very, very beautiful man, so to speak, called Paolo. And I fell for him big time, really, really big time. And then on the 16th of December, I had a ream of messages that he felt the same about me, and that I'd enriched his life and he wanted to do the same for me. Then he said I'd always expected to be a good father and a husband. So I knew there was doubt there. And the next day, we spent a couple of hours on the phone and we worked out how we were going to go forward. And I was ecstatically happy. And then the next morning, I messaged him, as I always did in the morning, and he didn't read the post. And so I messaged again later on in the day, and he didn't read the post. And then I think it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the messages were read, but he didn't respond. And I just thought, oh my God, he has just regretted everything he ever said to me, and he's ghosted me. And I was devastated. And I sent some more messages over Christmas and, my birthday, and because we were going to chat then, and just said, you said we'd always be friends, and I don't understand why we can't be friends. And none of those messages were read. And on New Year's Eve, 2019, I went onto his Facebook, and there was a post that I didn't really understand because it was in Italian. I wasn't sure what it meant at first, but it was all hearts and halos. And it just said, oh no, Paolo. And I was devastated. And I phoned my daughters and I said, I think he's died. And they said, don't be stupid. Maybe one of his parents has died. And they both rushed home. And as my youngest came through the door, she said, I'm so sorry, Mama. And I said, I don't know, he's dead. And she said, yes. And she showed me, she'd searched it, and he had died the night that we'd spoken in his sleep. So I put on his Facebook page, can anybody tell me how Paolo died? And his flatmates and his cousins contacted me. And so did my next guest, the amazing Suzanne. Now, we were both seeing, it was Tinder, and we were both in love with him at the same time. And we were both in shock. And we decided to meet up for a cup of mint tea, I believe, in a pub. And we talked about him. And we asked each other the normal question, did you sleep with him? And I had slept with him, and I had discovered I had something called lock vag. So I told Suzanne that, and she went, oh, that's my job, sorting out emotional trauma and orgasms and vaginas and things. And I'm like going, what the fuck? And she was so kind and so generous with her time to me. And a few weeks later, she invited me for an emotional healing. And I went to the temple, and it was a very weird experience. Do you want to explain it, Suzanne? Welcome to the Wellness Way.
Hello. So I invited Philly along to come and be one of my case studies because somebody had dropped out, and she said I'd be delighted to. So we actually we went through the consultation, and we got into, we do a connection ceremony first because it actually helps the energy flow, because this is somatic body work as well. We're creating a circuit of energy. And I mean, during the the connection ritual, there was like insane energy, wasn't there? It was like both of us, it was like huge waves of energy coming through both of us.
I'd never felt anything like it before in my life. It was just
I had, insane. But I didn't expect it to feel that with a woman. And yeah, during that session, Philly actually went into a huge amount of trauma release. And actually, when I was working on her back, the erector spinae muscles, the muscles either side of her spine, were just rippling like this, to watch it. And this was Kundalini energy, which had been temporarily activated during the session. This life force energy actually working up the side of the spine, releasing trauma from her body. But what she'd actually got into, what was known as a throat lock, when we're very blocked around this area, the energy actually travels down the hands, and this happened, which is basically like claw hands. So it
was my crab claw.
Crab claw hands, yeah. So she'd gone into this throat lock, and her hands had clawed. I knew exactly why it had happened. So I did what I'd been taught to do, which was to actually just rewind that circuit of energy, and I got her to hold her breath, and we did a few other things just to release that energy and to release her hands. And we progressed with the session, but we didn't actually do the yoni massage because she had gone into such a huge process, such huge trauma release, that if we went on and did yoni massage, that because there's such a huge amount of trauma held in the pelvic basin for most people, because this is where trauma ends up. If you have a look at my beautiful pelvis model here, the pelvis is the only other structure other than our head that is actually a basin. And what happens is trauma works its way down. This is a collector of waste, basically. So all our waste comes through here. Obviously, we even push children out through there. But the trauma all ends up in the pelvic basin here. So being as she'd already gone into such a huge trauma release, if I had then started releasing trauma in here as well, it would have re-traumatized her, and there would have been too much processing for her to go through afterwards. And that in itself can cause trauma. It can re-traumatize somebody. So it's really important in those cases just to give her enough to go away and process. Otherwise, she's never, ever going to want to re-engage with any kind of healing practice again, because it would just have overwhelmed her. So that's basically kind of what happened, isn't it?
Yes, that's it in a nutshell, or in a pelvic floor. It was traumatic. So I'd just like to play the clip now from Dr. John Gray that was in the previous podcast that had this million views about the woman's orgasm. So we're just going to roll that now.
What the Taoists say is if you masturbate your clitoris, if you're a woman all by yourself, you will overstimulate your kidneys, meridians, and then you'll gain weight. This is for every woman to know. Throw away those vibrators. You don't need to have sex with a robot. Find a man. I
haven't gained weight. Sorry. And I'd like to know your thoughts on this, because a lot of ladies were very up in arms about throwing away the plastic, their vibrators, and only having sex with a man, and not only just a man, but a husband. So I wonder if you could just take us back. So you're also a specialist in Soma breath work, Kundalini breath work. You've done more trainings than anybody I know on the orgasm and releasing emotional energy and how it can heal the body and be a healing peak. And so I just would like your side of the story, my lovely.
Okay, so look, there's several ways we can release trauma. As I've said, there's a lot of trauma in the pelvic basin, but not just in the pelvic basin, but in the actual, on the, where the pubic bone is, all around this area, there is trauma. So we apply pressure and breath work a lot of the time to release trauma, and any kind of pressure and breath work can potentially release trauma. And I know myself, I have used a bullet which does vibrate and release trauma. So that from a woman, I'm telling you from a woman who's actually experienced it, that whatever the textbooks say, it is possible. So overstimulation of the clitoris can lead to desensitization of it. So, like anything, yes, enjoy it, but, just find some balance with it is what I would say.
So, Suzanne, I just want to take our audience back a little bit, because I know that you suffered some huge trauma in your life. And I just wondered if you'd be kind enough to share that with us, from, how your journey started, what was going on in your life that started your journey into your Kundalini awakening.
Okay, so actually, for as long as I can remember, I've had an energy that was different from other people. I can even remember saying at 4 years old, Mum, nobody is like me. And I could feel there was a difference. I had this huge energy and I didn't know what it was. And at 11 years old, I had my first Kundalini experience. So I had this huge, massive wave of energy, much like you and I felt in the session, that actually completely took my breath away.
That must have been very scary at 11 years old.
It was weird, to be fair. And actually the same night, and I only found out this a few years ago that this often happens, is I had a lucid dream of a massive snake. And I actually was sleeping on the floor in a friend's lounge with her, on a sleepover. And I jumped off the bed arrangement onto the sofa, and I could see this massive snake coming across the lounge into the bed. And I was trying to speak, in this lucid dream state, you can't actually really make a sound. So I wasn't able to shout to her to say, get up, get up. And it wasn't until much, much later, when I came out of my second marriage, which was a very dysfunctional and very, very toxic marriage for 20 years. I'd bottled up an awful lot. I'd had a very violent marriage before that, briefly. And I also came from a very traumatic, violent household. So I'd grown up in survival. I didn't know that at the time, but I had grown up in survival, and that actually manifests in the masculine. We actually present ourselves in quite a masculine way because that feels safe to us. So we live in survival. We're like this. We're like a wound up spring, and we armor ourselves. So body armoring is the body starts to armor itself, and it becomes very tight and hard and impenetrable, if you like. And it's a very similar thing to lock vag, only in the body. The body becomes very tight.
Yeah. No. I had this before. I had a frozen shoulder. And
I
had a
100%
tumor in my throat. I had loads of shit going on. I had the spinal fusion. So the body absolutely traps that trauma,
holds the trauma.
I'd like you to talk and tell people, because you're talking about masculine and feminine, and there'll be some of our audience here that don't know about the yin yang, masculine,
polarity.
Feminine,
It's really important. It follows through with everything. So so there's so many ways we can look at polarity, and in relationships in particular. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's a mixed sex relationship, a same-sex relationship, or even if that's like a transgender with what is now same-sex relationship. It's all about what energy we bring. So we, as women, we should be in our feminine energy. We're not always, because we're sometimes in survival mode and we don't know how to be in our feminine energy because it doesn't feel safe. And for a guy to be in his masculine energy, a man should lead. And that doesn't sound very PC at all. But if we go back to the basics of inhumanness, what we need a man to lead and be devotional in order for us to feel safe and surrender into our feminine and be not subservient, but just surrender in our softer, more feminine mode. And when polarity works, it works beautifully. So even if we've got a same-sex couple, there's normally one showing up in a more masculine energy and one showing up in a more feminine energy, in a softer energy. There's always one more dominant. We even see it with twins. You get one more dominant twin, because that is the way of the universe. We have yin and yang, and everything has an opposite side, and for it to work as a whole, we have to have those two sides. So when we get, say, for instance, and I'm guilty of it myself, and you might even recognize some of those things within yourself. When we grow up in survival and we are in our masculine, we're successful, we're self-sufficient, we don't actually need a man for anything. So instantly the guy is like, well, wow, what's my role then? Where do I come in all of this? Because I actually feel now completely disempowered to be anything for this woman. So how can he then lead in his masculine and you surrender softly into your feminine?
I think this is what got a lot of controversy on the clip with Dr. Gray, is that a lot of women, because I know I stand in my masculine power. I'm
Yeah, so
aware
do
of
I
that.
sometimes. I have to work really hard not to.
But I don't really know how to get out of it anymore, because I've spent so much time on my own.
Yes.
And I don't want to be subservient to anyone. So can you explain the difference between surrendering and being subservient? Because I think that's the crux of it for me.
100%. So no one wants to be with an arrogant arse who is just telling them what to do, which is controlling and narcissistic. That is not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about our natural, the thing that men love about women, which is our softness, our femininity. That is what a man loves about a woman. So and it's okay as a woman at work, sometimes you have to be an alpha because you're competing in what might be a masculine environment. So you've actually got to step up into your masculine and compete on that level. But when you get home, do you want to battle with your husband? You know, he needs to feel like he's got a place in the home that he can lead, because he needs that to feel masculine. So hard as it is, girls, you might have to say to your guy, even though in your head you're going to do it anyway, just to play the game, is say, you know, baby, is it okay if we get that rug? You know, I've seen a really amazing rug. It looked beautiful in the lounge. And he'd be like, babe, do what you want. You know, it's fine. But, you know, the fact that you asked him, he's like, oh, she asked me. Or instead of saying, right, I've booked that restaurant for 7:00 tonight, our favourite one, you know. Another way to approach that would be to say to your partner, oh, babe, do you remember when we went to that restaurant and the food was so amazing? And then hopefully something in his head is going to say, well, should we go then? All right, darling, do you want to book it for us? And because he's leading, you're allowing him to lead. That's basically, you've just got to allow him to lead sometimes, and not completely rip his balls off and do everything and make him feel like he doesn't have a role.
I have to say, I find all of this very alien, but it's
I did too.
It's most probably why my marriage fell to pieces.
It was as well.
Because when you talk about it like this, I kind of go, oh my God, I really did. Yeah, I didn't ask anything. I just went, we're doing this, we're doing that.
We're doing
I'm
that.
buying that. I'm doing, yeah. I never once engaged for an opinion, really.
Exactly. So he was trying to be masculine. You're coming in a masculine, and we've basically got two penises meeting each other. And how is that ever going to work?
Well,
you know,
I mean, it does in same-sex relationships.
Oh, it does. But even then, in same-sex relationships, there's going to be an element of polarity. One is going to be more dominant, whilst the other one's going to be a little bit more softer. You know. Because there has to be, although there's just going to be arguments and bitching and fighting and shouting, you know.
And do you think there's ever a relationship can work if the woman has the masculine energy in her and the man has the feminine energy? Can it be reversed?
This is called inverted polarity. So this is a guy fully in his feminine, where he's very, very weak and soft, and he's like, no, I don't want to do that. You know, I don't want to lift anything. You lift it. And she's in her feminine. And you do see relationships like that, because there is a polarity, but it's a little bit skewed, for want of a better word. But there is a polarity. It's not healthy. But, you know, some people do go through life like that. But ultimately, you know, are they happy? Actually, when you ask, are they, you know, if you ask them, are you deeply happy in your marriage? Are they? You know, they might be, they might not be.
I think everybody's different, and everybody.
So everything's unique, isn't it?
Yeah, everything is unique. So I'm going to come back to the vibrators now.
Yes,
because Dr. John Gray asked us ladies to throw away our vibrator. Now, he talked about the kidney meridian and putting on weight, which, as I said at the end of the clip, didn't happen to me because I love my vibrator. So talk to us about, so you mentioned briefly about overstimulating.
Yes.
And earlier in that podcast, he talked very much about, the G spot and the 5 spots inside.
There are 5. Actually, they're not all inside. There are 5 G spots. Yes, there are. So, so a lot of women think that their G spot is their clitoris, and they don't realise that they actually have 5 other G spots. One of which is actually very close to the anus. The other one is actually on the front wall inside. It's like, if you were going to insert your fingers, it would be on the front wall, sort of 2 or 3 inches on the inside. And actually, to access it, you quite often have to, because it's actually on the tube that runs from your bladder that supplies the urine. There's another structure there that holds something called amrita. This is, if a woman squirts, it's called amrita. And it might look like it comes from the same place, but it comes from a completely separate gland. So my mentor calls this yoni crying, because it actually holds emotion when when it's released. But to access it, sometimes you have to actually raise the pelvis and push down on the abdomen to actually access it. But it can still feel very, very, very pleasant without pushing down. So it's on the front inner wall. So to access that, a straight vibrator isn't going to access that anyway. The other one you have, so we've done 3, haven't we? The other one is that there's one above and below the cervix. So one of them is there all the time. So if you can access the cervix, that can be pleasurable. And then the 5th one only appears after orgasm. And that's why when you have sex, if you've had really good sex and then you have sex again, that's why it's even more like amazing, because this 5th G spot emerges after orgasm.
Didn't know that. But you can still just have a clitoral orgasm.
You can indeed, and some women that's
still
all
get
they
a release.
ever have without penetration. Yes. So I've had all sorts of releases. I've had a lot of trauma release work done. So even a clitoral orgasm could potentially give you enough energy to actually, if you release emotion or trauma, this is how it feels. It feels like a ball of energy rises all the way up through your body, and then it will be, what, you won't just cry a little bit, you'll be crying from the pit of your pelvis. So it's a very deep sobbing, and it comes right from the pit of your stomach. It comes right from here, because there would have been, if you look at this area here, all of this on the outside, this all holds trauma. This is the anus, these are the yoni lips, this is the clitoris. So all of this area holds trauma. So by releasing this is actually a mini lingam anyway. And actually the branches of that travel, here inside. So it stands to reason that why wouldn't there be, trauma around here? If you're working around here and you have an orgasm, well, why couldn't you release something?
No, absolutely. And I think, especially for women that have had, babies, the amount of trauma in having a child. I mean, I had to have 2.
Massive.
I had to have an emergency.
Can be. Not always.
Yeah. My first one, I had a C-section, and I held on as long as I possibly could to give birth naturally. And then we lost my baby's heartbeat, and then mine started going, and it was like, and then they took me in.
Very similar story, actually.
I know. And they took me in, and then they got both of our heartbeats back. And so I screamed, "No, get me back on the ward." I'm
identical to my story.
And so they did, and then they lost the heartbeat again, and then went in and did the C-section. And with my second daughter, I was too afraid to even try and give birth.
Yeah.
And so that's
big trauma.
Massive trauma that you're holding all in that area. And then I had something else. I don't know about you, but after my second cesarean, about a month later, all the stitches came undone, and I hemorrhaged for just poured blood. And they're going, "We can't take you back in and do anything, because we'd never find where the stitches were." But I think, and then I went on to have the spinal fusion, which was the last disc of my spine. So they actually cut my nerves off from the waist below. So I didn't have an orgasm for over 8 years.
Yeah.
And I had to rebuild the nervous system. And so if you can just talk us through that
Sure.
whole nervous system of, because I actually know so many people that have never had an orgasm.
Yes.
And I've been asking this question a lot recently, going,
Yeah,
have you had an orgasm?
There's a big reason why.
Okay, tell us.
And it comes down to surrender.
Oh,
feminine. So because we are in a survival state in our masculine, we don't give ourselves, one, permission to receive, two, permission to let go. Does it make sense now?
yes,
because we're in survival, we are holding on for dear life. We're holding on because that's what our body has taught us to do over the years, is hold on for dear life. So why then would we have sex and then fully be exuberant and let go and just be very vulnerable, that word I was talking about, and feel into it? So one of the things, especially in Tantra, that I teach is for girls to get out of their head and back into their body, moreover, into their vagina. Because how many times are women having sex thinking, oh God, I've got to pick the kids up from school later on, I've got shopping to do, and I'm never going to get the housework done. Is the dog chewing the doormat? There's so many things going on in a woman's mind.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you're not surrendering when you're thinking about those things. You're not surrendering.
You're not surrendering into anything. You're actually trying to control it and actually wishing it was over and done with. And especially, and again, this is probably a subject for another day, but in lovemaking, when a guy is just banging like this, like a hammer drill, actually the woman shuts off, and because the yoni wasn't ready for this, this penetration, and then he's banging like this, and you have to actually slow down and breathe together to feel anything. So the yoni won't feel anything unless that it's slow and we can actually breathe together and actually feel into it. She feels safe to surrender. I don't feel safe if a guy's banging away like this. If it's not in the latter part of lovemaking, I don't feel safe. I shut off and I wish it was over.
Yep. No, absolutely.
I think that's the same for most women.
Will relate to that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I just Dr. John Gray did another clip on men and their orgasms and not releasing too often, about saving up your energy. So I'd like you to talk us through that.
Okay, so for a guy, so our sexual energy, it's something that we have from birth, and it is our life force energy. Now, for a woman to orgasm, it actually balances a woman. It gives her energy because it is very balancing for her hormones. But for a guy, it's very, very depleting. So if you think like 35 million sperms have been created in this factory that could populate probably the whole of Europe, and he's ejaculating this out of his body. And sometimes guys, they neurotically masturbate 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times a day. Imagine how much energy that takes. So by preserving our sperm, this energy, and then actually learning some of the Taoist techniques of harnessing this sexual energy, we can actually use this life force energy to drive. It's our driving force. So it's what drives us forward to work, to procreate, to be creative. So without that, we're very depleted. And also in the Taoist tradition, in the winter, it's 100 times more debilitating for a man to ejaculate than in the summer.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so in the winter months, particularly, it's about harnessing and preserving our energy, right?
And does the same apply to women? Are we releasing our energy when we orgasm?
We need, because we store emotion. So that, look, the male and the female G-spot are exactly the same, essentially. So we have this structure on the tube that comes from our bladder to where we release, and the guys have their prostate gland. We actually, in the Tantra world that I work in, we call it the female prostate and the male prostate, because it's the same thing, and we both hold emotion in here, both of us. So guys end up with prostate cancer, enlarged prostates. Women end up with they go a bit crazy actually, because their hormones become unbalanced. So when we release this, the women's hormones are restored to balance, and we feel a lot better. For the guys, what happens is when they ejaculate, they're draining down their testosterone. So their testosterone gives them energy, it gives them vigor and life. But when they ejaculate, this comes right down. For women, their estrogen goes up. So there's this whole, disparity. So again, with anything, there needs to be balance. So I would say to anybody who's interested in sperm retention, take your age and divide it by 5. And that's the amount of days to go between ejaculations. So give your body a chance. And guys, you can do an experiment. So if you want to ejaculate the night before you're going to go and play football, see what your performance is like, or go to the gym. And then the next time you go, leave it a few days, don't ejaculate, and see how much more energy you've got. See how much better you can perform at work, how much better your concentration is and your cognitive function.
Yeah, no, there's quite a few comments in my TikTok on this where there was one young man who's a boxer and they're not allowed to ejaculate.
Footballers, that's why they're not allowed to have
footballers,
sex.
Their wives aren't allowed to join them and they're not allowed sex. Yeah, absolutely.
And if they just knew Tantra, they could have sex, because they would actually be retaining their sperm and achieving full body orgasm. The man would be having full body orgasm. Instead of having a sneeze in the groin for 5 seconds, he could be for hours and hours circulating this sexual energy, having full body orgasms, and actually feeling his wife's orgasms rippling all through his body. So, he could have a happy ending, or he could have a happier ending.
I've yet to experience anything like that. I'm still waiting for my Kundalini awakening.
You will it's my mission. You're going to become a multi-orgasmic woman.
One day, my lovelies. At the moment, we just need to get my vagina open. That's the most important
Let's
thing.
talk then about alternatives to vibrators. Now, I'm not a fan of vibrators that go inside. I don't know, just for me, I don't like the texture of them. It doesn't really do it for me at all, actually. I don't regularly use a vibrator full stop, unless I feel, if I haven't seen my partner for a while and I feel like I need to feel a little bit more balanced, then I might. So these are both black obsidian. So this is a uni stick, and this is like a uni wand, and this is a uni wand as well. These are like a natural crystal stone. It's a very, very dense stone, or crystal, I should say. And its properties are that it absorbs negative energy. So the traditional Taoist preferred crystal is jade, and the darker the jade, the better. So because it's a very dense stone, it doesn't crack. So if you drop one of these on the floor, you're probably going to need to throw it away, because it's got a crack in it. It's going to harbour bacteria. But so these are traditionally known for very good for actually pulling trauma out of the pelvic basin. So that is why I have black obsidian. So I used to use, now I'm of an age where I don't have periods. So, but when I did used to have periods, I had horrendous problems. I had adenomyosis, endometriosis, and I'd get huge pain for days before my period would emerge. And I used to use this, and I would just meditate with it. Guaranteed the next day I would get my period. Wow. It would just release enough for me to get my period and give me some relief.
And would it still be a very painful period, or would the stone take that away?
My periods were always very, very painful. I didn't know at that time I had endometriosis and adenomyosis. They were pretty horrific, and lots of adhesions, unfortunately. But so coming on to this one, this is
a more penis shaped. It's got a curve in it.
Yes, it is. So basically, this is designed to find your G-spot. Now, you can also use it on your cervix as well. But the reason it's curved is so that you can actually access your G-spot. Now, I prefer just to meditate with this, actually, rather than actually physically, partake in masturbation with it. I actually prefer it. I actually just use it and I meditate. I go into really deep meditation and I fall asleep with it. And that's it. That's all I do with it.
Oh, but a lot of people, it's like a cuddly toy.
Almost. But a lot of people do actually use them for masturbation. So my teacher, he's not a fan of vibrators, and he said, if you've got to use something, use one of these. So I got this from, I actually ordered it from Canada. I can try. I'll try and give you the link so that you can later on put it on the
Put it in the show
podcast.
notes.
Yeah. So for me, it's going to be black obsidian or jade.
Jade.
Yeah,
and the darker
they're
jade,
the
the
two
better.
go-to ones, because jade is very, very healing, and this is really good for trauma.
Fantastic. Well, that's a very good tip for us ladies, and any men that also want one. You know, we are very, very inclusive here.
Butt plugs as well.
So then I want to talk a little bit about transgender with you.
Yeah,
because
really
I
important
know
subject.
that yeah, it's such an important subject at the moment, and I know that you work with quite a few transgender
I do, yes.
people, and so this is a conversation that I'd like to have. Obviously, if you want to change sex or whatever, then you are out of balance. You cannot be in balance. But can you talk us through some of the trauma that takes people on this journey, or the fact they can't accept themselves? What is it, from the people that you've worked with? What do you find? Is there a link? Is there something that links them all together?
Do you know what? They're some of the most beautiful people I've ever met, and it's been, for those of you who, I have another hat that I wear. For 25 odd years I've had a laser clinic and aesthetics and hair and beauty salons. So that is that's my everyday job that I've done for many, many years. And I do a lot of laser treatment for transgender clients. And over those years, I've had a lot of deep conversations with these clients. And for most of them just say their whole life, they just felt like they were in the wrong body. Some of them wait until their children are old enough, and most of them get married and have children, but then they get so that they just can't be their authentic self at all, and they can't live like that any longer. And a lot of them have said to me, not all of them, but a lot of them have said the only other option was actually to take their own life. Wow. And to feel that mismatched in your body must be horrific, and that in itself is a trauma.
Yeah, massive trauma. But we're seeing this talked about more and more, and with younger and younger people.
Yes, becoming much more open and acceptable to embrace that side, which I do agree with, allowing people to express themselves. And I know that we spoke before, and you said that teenagers, they change so much, and you're so right. And the teenage brain is, the frontal lobe of the teenage brain is quite inactive, and it doesn't actually become more active until sort of like they're about 23, 25. I mean, there was a brilliant book written by Frances E. Jensen called The Teenage Brain, and it's and she said it's a neuroscientist's guide to surviving teenagers and adolescents, and I guess we all need a survival guide for that, because it's not easy, is it, bringing up
it's
teenagers?
It's not easy.
Okay, so in there she explains a lot about how they feel things. So they feel anger. Other areas of the brain have to sort of compensate, and so other areas fire up, so they feel everything very intensely. And the things that would make a fully developed adult reason with things and make them feel, oh, okay, fair enough, I can accept that. The teenage brain doesn't really do that. So they feel everything really intensely, so really angry, really emotional, which would explain probably some of our own reactions that we get with our own children. And you think, why are they reacting like that? Because they can't actually help it. So I think in the UK, if somebody wants to transition, now some of them know from a very young age, and they have supportive parents that allow them to live as a female. And as far as I know, the schools are fairly supportive of that, and I don't see any harm in that particularly. And it's a brave thing for a teenager to do, isn't it? I mean, most teenagers just want to fit in, and that really isn't fitting in, is it?
No,
so that's quite a brave statement to make. And as far as I know, most people who are goths as teenagers are very rarely goths as adults. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm sure that they would have to wait until they were possibly a certain age before properly transitioning and having surgery. And in this country, we have an amazing centre in Charing Cross in London, where they have to go and be assessed, and they have to have psychological assessments, and they have to meet a lot of criteria before they're even put forward. And they have to live as a woman for a certain amount of years and, integrate into society as a woman.
But it can also be a woman wanting to live as a man.
Yeah, 100%.
So
it can be totally the other way around. Yeah, I mean, we have gender reassignment both ways.
Yeah, we've just had the Lionsgate portal in August, and the energy that I felt on the 8th of August was like nothing I've ever felt before.
I had anxiety, actually. I was like, I don't get anxiety. Why have I got anxiety?
Oh, I'm sorry, love. Why did you have anxiety?
Well,
because we're all
because
waking
the energy,
up.
Yeah, because this huge energy, on the earth coming up. So yeah, quite often, if I have no explanation for something, I'll go out. Is there a full moon? What's going on here? Because normally there's a reason for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the full moons in the last year have sent me completely.
Yeah, they're massive.
They're massive.
They don't call lunatics lunar for nothing.
Oh my God, I hadn't thought of that. That's what it is.
Wards or psychiatric institutions, they have everything goes crazy when there's a full moon, because it really does pull a lot of stuff. We're made of a lot of water, and it affects the tides. So why wouldn't it affect us?
Yeah, absolutely. But I hadn't actually equated that word, because all words have meaning. They all come from.
Of course they do, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that I always use to get me out of trauma is just getting back out into nature, getting my feet on the ground, doing the grounding, doing the breath work, and just releasing that trauma.
How do you feel? Do you actually feel alive, or do you feel numb when you're in nature?
Alive.
Exactly.
You can't not feel alive when you're in nature. It's my mum used to call her garden a growing work of art, and she said, it's such a work of art, and it's never the same painting at any millisecond of the day, and it isn't. It's just, you look at it and you smile. If you actually, and the problem is that we spend a lot of time where we might go out in nature, but we're not looking at it. We're looking at our phones.
Exactly. So we're not taking time to actually absorb our surroundings, and that being present in all things allows us to be present in our body. If we're not present, full stop. I have a telly in my house, but I don't watch it. People say, well, what do you do? And I'm like, I study, I write my courses, I've got a real thirst for knowledge. I exercise, I do yoga, I do meditation, I do singing bowls, or whatever. That's what makes me feel alive. And I spend so many years in numbness. I don't want to go back to numbness. I want to feel alive.
And I think, for people that haven't suffered, you've had deep trauma and I've had deep trauma, but there are lots of people that kind of, say, I haven't had any trauma. I don't think people recognize really what
life is traumatic. The system that we live in is traumatic, because we have sensory overload all the time. So we're having this bombarded emails, texts, WhatsApps, Facebook. It's all coming in all different directions, and it's too much. We can't process it. So because it's actually really uncomfortable, is we become numb to it. But in doing so, we start to become numb to a lot of things, like even our sense of taste, our 5 senses. So let's talk about those, because when we take on trauma, they can only come in 5 ways. The 5 senses. Did I touch it? Did it touch me? Did I smell it? Did I taste it? Did I see it? Did I hear it? That's it.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting with COVID that so many people lost their smell and their taste.
Yes.
Well, that's because they've just been put in fear and then trauma. And it doesn't matter if they had COVID very mildly. They still go, well, I've got this. It's going,
it's funny, because I didn't lose my sense of taste or smell. I did get COVID.
So, but the minute you have that positive, and we know the testing system did not work in any shape or form, but the minute you think you've got something that you're being bombarded on the news could kill you at any moment.
Yeah, but I didn't watch the news, and I was quite pleased I had it so that I built on my immunity. I was like, at least I've got it now. I can have, good immunity and get on with my life.
A last piece of advice for men and women about orgasm, just a very quick one. And then where can our audience find you?
Okay, so my main bit of advice, guys and girls, is slow down, feel into it. If there's one thing, please just try this with your lovemaking. For a woman, for her yoni to be ready to receive, it's going to take about 20 minutes. Please just love and adore her yoni and turn her mind off, because it's going off on, 24/7. A woman needs to be put to sleep in order to be woken up. And the guy needs to be woken up, if you like. So if you spend a lot of time pleasuring her, she will be like dying to have sex with you. She'll be like, just get it, come on, let's do it. And when you're in there, I want you to maintain breath. So kiss her very sensually, very slowly, and really feel into that breath and make love slowly to her, deeply and slowly. Watch her orgasm like she doesn't orgasm normally. She will have an amazing experience with you.
Absolutely. And that goes for same-sex relationships.
Yes,
as well.
100%. So she will feel safe to let go. If you're in a same-sex couple, decide who is more in their masculine, more in their feminine, and it's the same. It's the same principle. So one's going to be more in their masculine, one's going to be more in their feminine, and that's generally how it is in most same-sex relationships. So just go with the polarity of the relationship. Obviously, you've got stuff that you guys do that is a little bit different from what we do, but it's not that different. So just embrace your masculine, embrace your feminine, whatever, your whether you're same sex, mixed sex, or whatever.
And limit the use of vibrators then.
Yeah, just limit it, really. I'm not saying cut it out, just limit it, just because you will desensitize it and you're going to find it harder and harder to reach any sort of peak. You can find me, if you want to DM me, you can find me. It's called Sukundalini on Insta, and that's Sukundilini, Sukundalini, SU.
And that will be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I've actually got I've got a massive Facebook group with tons of content. It's called Soma Sutra. I have Soma Sutra School of Healing and Awakening. So you can join me on any of my courses. That I run a full-day emotional release course. We're teaching you the techniques that I use on other people, how to do it yourself. Or you can come and see me for a session. I do all sorts of stuff for trauma. I work with the limbic system. I work with the body, the breath, somatically, whatever.
And you can work online with people as well.
Yes, I can. Yeah, so I do Zoom sessions for something called BLAST, bilateral and analysis stimulation treatment. We work with the limbic system. It's bilateral eye movement with specific suggestions. You're in an eyes open trance, transitioning the memory that's stuck in the right side hemisphere, causing a freeze state or an emotional response in the body that keeps replaying. And we transition it to the left side hemisphere so that it's so much relief on the body. And then it is actually a distant memory like it should be and can be processed. That's an amazing technique, and I quite often do that before I even lay my hands on anybody.
Yeah, no, I was lucky enough to have a session with you doing that earlier this year. And
Yeah,
it was just
it's a great technique.
Amazing technique. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
What can I say? But just thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's always a pleasure.
And
there's going to be many more to come.
There will be. And I will be here next week with the beautiful Janice Thompson, and we are going to talk about grief. So Suzanne and I have spoken a bit today about our grief, and we're going to be taking a deeper dive into that. I actually went to see Janice after Paolo died, and I hit the wall. I didn't know what to do. She's a remarkable lady. But for now, thank you, Suzanne Jane Taylor. That was absolutely fantastic. Bless you. Thank you, honey.